Peter Drekmeier.
Thank you. Dennis forgot to mention I'm still a proud customer of Palo Alto Utilities, and I'm honored to be presenting in between two of my favorite water professionals. So I'm going to jump right in here. I'm going to focus on the SFPUC, since so many of us depend on the Hetch Hetchy water. And I want to focus on sustainable water, not just for one species called humans, but for all species, for the ecosystem. So the question I'm asking here is, can we meet the State Water Board's co-equal goals, the state's co-equal goals of ensuring a reliable water supply and restoring the Bay Delta ecosystem? Oops. So just to refamiliarize you with the Tuolumne River, drains the northern half of Yosemite, flows through the Sierra, then through the Central Valley, the city of Modesto, and joins the San Joaquin River. Okay, so here is Hetch Hetchy Reservoir, owned and operated by the SFPUC. They provide water to 2.7 million people in the Bay Area. 85% of that water comes from the Tuolumne. About a third goes to San Francisco, 2/3 to customers in San Mateo, Santa Clara, and Alameda counties. And those 26 customers outside of San Francisco are represented by an agency called the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency, or BOSCA. And Don Pedro Reservoir, the sixth largest in the state, owned and operated by the Modesto and Turlock irrigation districts. And it is primarily used to irrigate 200,000 acres of prime farmland in Stanislaus County. So here you have San Francisco and the BOSCA agencies. You might see your community there. Okay, so the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. It was required by the Clean Water Act, first adopted in 1978, updated in 1995, but hasn't seen an update since. So back around 2009, the State Water Board embarked on updating the Bay Delta Plan. And in 2018, they adopted phase 1 of the plan, looking at the San Joaquin Basin and its 3 major tributaries, the Stanislaus, Tuolumne, and Merced. And what they adopted was increasing the unimpaired flow, the percentage of natural flow in the river between the months of February and June to 40%. So those are critical months for baby salmon. That's why we're seeing this failure of the salmon runs, the end of the closure of the commercial fishing season this year, because the baby fish just aren't able to get their way back to the ocean. So the irrigation districts sued the State Water Board. So the plan was adopted but hasn't been implemented yet. We kind of expected that, but we were pretty disappointed that the SFPUC and BOSCA also joined the lawsuit. So what we did is we looked at, okay, if the drought of record repeated, 6 years, 87 to 92, with the Bay Delta Plan flows in place, could we manage it? And what we found was at current demand, we could manage it without requiring any rationing or developing any new alternative water supplies. Seemed like pretty good news. But then we learned that the SFPUC plans for something called the design drought, which combines the 2 most severe droughts from the last century. The 6-year drought followed immediately by 76-77, the driest 2-year period on record. And assuming demand would eventually be 265 million gallons per day, which is the cumulative set of contracts that they have with different water agencies. So the length of the design drought is really important because you now have to stretch 6 or 7 years worth of water into an 8th year. And so you have to have more severe rationing, or you have to invest in more alternative water supplies. So much more extreme than any other major water agency. Most are planning for 6 years at this point. So the SFPUC did a smart thing. They paid $750,000 to study how climate change might affect the water supply, called the Long-Term Vulnerability Assessment. And what I think was the key takeaway is that mean annual precipitation isn't expected to change much, but we're going to have these swings. We're going to have drier years, we're going to have wetter years. But it's a high watershed. Snowpack is above it. Warmer air will carry more moisture, so we have big years like this year, maybe this coming year too. So we asked, well, what's the return period of the design drought? Which means, what's the likelihood of occurrence? Because in the final plan, they had return periods for the known droughts, but nothing for the design drought. And we asked, well, do we just multiply these together? But through a Public Records Act request, we did see that the consultants had studied this, and they said probably once in 25,000 years, we might have a drought as severe as the design drought. And the SFPUC said, well, we didn't include this in the final report because we just, there's still uncertainty. But, but they also, so the design drought, they had this figure that water needed out of a storage would be about 1.3 million acre feet. So that was helpful because we had to do a little bit of sleuthing to figure out how the plan could help us. The plan looked at 100 plus years of observed data, 1,100 years of tree ring data, and ran 25,000 simulated model runs. And these were the most extreme droughts. And here's the design drought here. So they couldn't create a drought as extreme as the design drought. So you probably are familiar with this report done by the Pacific Institute a few years ago. They looked at the major water agencies in California, and they looked at the change in demand between 2000 and 2015. And here you see for the SFPUC that the population of the service area grew by 8%, but per capita demand decreased by 30%. So overall, demand was down 25%. Congratulations to all of us. So here is system deliveries from the SFPUC since the early 70s. You see that big dip there, 76, 77. That was the 2-year drought of record. And these are the years that the design drought, that inspired the design drought. So we did almost run out of water. But you see that demand going into that drought was about 290 million gallons per day, MGD. So it was the highest level. After this drought, this SFPUC adopted something called the water first policy. So giving priority to water supply over hydropower generation. And then you see around 2008, we began to invest $4.8 billion plus debt service in the water system improvement program so that we could withstand a major earthquake and not make Carla nervous. And the price of water started increasing and eventually became 3 times what it was before. So you see a dip there that was triggered by the price signal, and then it kind of plateaued around 223 MGD there in around 2013. And then we had the drought of the teens, and we found that we still had a lot of potential to conserve water. And for the last 9 years, demand has been under 200 million gallons per day. So these are historic demand projections. And you can see that demand was projected to grow to anywhere between 350 million gallons per day and 450 million gallons per day. And here's what it was. And the thing is that the SFPUC designed their system expecting demand to be up around 400 MGD. So we're at half of that. Now the long-term vulnerability assessment, they don't come right out and say things, but they do point out that the Bay Delta plan would be the equivalent of demand increasing by 15%. And the baseline they used in the report was more than 15% what it's been. So here, the demand projections were 100% more than what actually occurred. So the SFPUC invested a lot in storage. Hetch Hetchy is a quarter of their storage. They have other reservoirs in the Tuolumne watershed. The Don Pedro Water Bank, they paid for almost half of New Don Pedro Dam, and what they got out of it was this water bank where they can prepay water. So when they have extra water available, their reservoirs are full, they can bank water in Don Pedro on paper. They can't access it, but then in a dry year, they can take water at Hetch Hetchy that they otherwise wouldn't be entitled to and subtract on paper the same amount from Don Pedro. So here's where the SFPUC and BOSCA are going to be wrong. And the demand projections have always been off by about 25%. But they used ABAG demand, population growth projections, which are incorporated in Plan Bay Area. Now, Plan Bay Area is this vision that we'll add 1 million more jobs by 2050. We're going to need more housing for the people who need housing now, plus for these 1 million more people coming. So population would grow by 2.5 million people. So this is from the Urban Water Management Plan. And what you see is that the bars there are per capita demand. The purple is population growth, and then the green line is overall demand, which, as we heard before, has been declining. So the population of San Francisco, the city, grew by 118,000 between 2005 and 2020. And what the Urban Water Management Plan projects is that it'll grow twice as fast in the coming 15 years. So up to 1.25 million people by 2045. So here you have the Plan Bay Area projections on the top, and below the Department of Finance, California, which has always been the producer of population projections. So the population growth in the Urban Water Management Plan for San Francisco is 4 times greater than Department of Finance. If Department of Finance is right, which they will be, that reduces demand in San Francisco alone by 10 million gallons per day. And you probably saw that Department of Finance came out with new population growth projections end of July. And whereas back in 2007, the projection was 60 million people by 2050, now it's down to just under 40 million people. And the projection is that the population of San Francisco is going to remain about flat, maybe lose a few people, as well as for San Mateo County. So BOSCA did a good thing. They produced a sensitivity analysis. And scenario A is looking at what's in the Urban Water Management Plan. And you can see more than 1% growth in population per year, 1% for jobs. On the other end is scenario E, which is Department of Finance population projections, which are about half. And what they found is under scenario E, demand in the BOSCA area from the SFPUC and from other sources would be 204 million gallons per day by 2045. And to put that in perspective, demand when this was created was 205. So demand would remain flat. And you can see at the bottom there that California Department of Finance projections are about 200,000 people added, whereas Plan Bay Area scenario A is about 500,000. So like other water agencies, during the recent drought, the SFPUC declared a water shortage emergency. This was at the end of 2021. And at the time, they had 4.5 years worth of water in storage. And they imposed a drought surcharge April of 2022, at a time when they still had 4 years worth of water in storage, more than that. And again, when people are paying more money, they use water more efficiently, and so demand was really low. So this was the SFPUC's water entitlements this last season. So going into the season, they needed 621,000 acre feet. So I realize there's a lot of different measures we use here. So demand, we talk about million gallons per day. Storage, acre feet, and flows in the river is CFS, cubic feet per second. So they needed 621, and they got 2.77 million. So demand has been under 200 million gallons per day for the last 9 years. 200 million gallons per day is about 225,000 acre feet. I know I don't need to tell Peter Glick this. He's got the numbers in his head, I'm sure. So 11 years worth of water was the entitlement for the SFPUC last year. Obviously, they had no place to put it. So the unimpaired flow in the lower Tuolumne was 81%. Remember, the Bay Delta plan would have required 40%. So here's the problem with the way the Tuolumne River is managed by the irrigation districts and the SFPUC. Anytime there's a dry year sequence, they hoard water. They only release the base flows. So between 2012 and 2016, unimpaired flow averaged 12%. Then 2017, it was 79%. Recently, 3 years, 13% unimpaired flow average. This year, 81%. So what we need to do is we need to distribute that water a little bit more evenly. And a big driver is going to be rate increases. That, it surprises me how few elected officials really care about the environment these days. I mean, this has always been a really green area. But they do seem to care more about finances and making sure their customers aren't outraged by rate increases. So these are the projections. Retail is San Francisco, wholesale Bosca. Brace yourselves, 11.6% increase this year. And these are going to be low because they don't even include any alternative water supplies, development of alternative water supplies. So back in May, one of the supervisors put an item on the agenda in San Francisco to consider rejecting the rate increases and auditing the SFPUC. Rejecting the rate increases didn't happen, but there might be an audit, might be in the spring. So in June, the SFPUC released a draft alternative water supply plan. And alternative water supplies can be very expensive. So this is a 2 MGD project on the west side of San Francisco, recycled water project, actually doing purified water to irrigate Golden Gate Park and others, but eventually might go directly to potable reuse. But just the capital cost, over $200 million. So what we need to do is, like if you get solar on your house, the first thing you do is you make your home as energy efficient as possible. You get rid of that old refrigerator. You change the light bulbs, all of that. Then you know how much you need to invest in solar, and you put solar on to your needs. So it's really important not to over-project how much water is going to need to be developed. So here is, okay, using the design drought, using the 265 MGD, and making San Jose and Santa Clara permanent customers, adding another 9 MGD, the water supply gap that would need to be filled is 122 million gallons per day. Here is using the Urban Water Management Plan projections, 244 MGD demand by 2045, and the deficit here is 92 MGD. So how much would it cost to develop 92 MGD? It costs $300 million per year. That's a lot of money. So we don't want to overinvest. What's going to really drive water recycling is these toxic algae blooms we've had 2 summers in a row in the bay. Too many nutrients from wastewater being released into the bay. There's going to be a big push for denitrification, and that's a great opportunity to recycle water, have a new supply, and meet the new regulations that will be coming soon. So we've been there. Somehow I got set back a little bit. Okay. SFPUC did do a study for the potential of recycled water, and they found up to 43 MGD was possible. It's a lot of water. So agriculture, that often comes up. It's like, isn't that the problem? Well, yes, it is. 80% of the water used in California is used for agriculture. And I think of agriculture as an untapped reservoir, because especially with seasonal crops that you can fallow, we have all this water that could be available for higher uses. Now, the Modesto and Turlock irrigation districts, they charge farmers $20 an acre foot. We pay $2,000, 100 times more. So it would be much more effective for us to, instead of develop a lot of expensive alternative water supplies here, partner with the irrigation districts where there's still a lot of low-hanging fruit and nuts. So this was, they wanted to sell water to the SFPUC 10 years ago. The farmers were outraged, so they tried to show that, hey, this makes a lot of sense, which financially did make a lot of sense for them. And they identified 25,000 to 40,000 acre feet that could be saved if they had the finances to put in the infrastructure, only $115 million. And so that comes to about $200 per acre foot. So the SFPUC could say, hey, we'll invest this and you share the savings with us. Another great opportunity, pressurized water. So you can do drip irrigation and sprinklers, much more efficient delivery. This is a pilot project, 2,000 acres just north of Stanislaus County. And they found that they could reduce water use by 30% and increase the crop yield by 30%. So again, the irrigation districts don't have the money to do this, SFPUC does. I'm gonna wrap up here. I know I'm pushing my time limit a little bit. Another driver, we talked about denitrification, toxic altitude blooms. Another driver is flood potential. So Peter, got your quote here. So fortunately, we didn't have a lot of flooding. It was a cooler spring, and we didn't have the snowpack come down all at once. But so here's for the Tuolumne River. That red line, you see 340 to the left, that's 340,000 acre feet that the Army Corps controls in Don Pedro for flood management. And then to the right of that is, maybe there's some capacity that helps with some of that, but it could be water that we can't really control. So the second row down is the 0.5% chance of flood. So maybe we might expect it every 200 years. And you see to the right of the red line, there's a lot of water that could become a problem. And then with climate change, a lot more of that water. So this is Don Pedro. Back in April, they encroached into that Army Corps flood storage space. And then they started evacuating water so that when the snowpack did finish melting, they'd be underneath that top line, which is full capacity of Don Pedro. So here's what they had to do. They had to max out releases, the most water they possibly could under the flood rules for about 3 months there. So that was a lot of water. Some people consider any water that reaches the ocean is wasted. But here you could make a case that the ecosystem didn't really need all that water. So how do we get some of that water into the ground and restore groundwater basins? Big challenge is we have a big year like 2017 on the left, and there's not time to capture as much water as we would like to. In dry years, there's not really an opportunity. So what I think we need to do is we need to manage our reservoirs more for flooding, which means have more capacity available going into the rainy season, but we don't want to just get rid of that water, so we need to put it underground and turn potential flood water into a resource for people, agriculture, and for the river. And the SFPUC could partner on a groundwater water bank very similar to the water bank at Don Pedro. So I would argue we're in great shape. We probably don't need to do a whole lot. We probably want a little bit of an insurance policy, and there's some opportunities here to have a great insurance policy without over-investing. So thank you very much. Do we have time for a couple questions, Dennis?
Yeah, a couple.
Yeah.
Anybody has them. I mean, you've laid out a case here, and
Thanks for believing in me, Dennis. Julianne? Yeah.
So what's being done to try to convince the SFPUC of the error of their ways?
Well, we've tried everything. I think a big problem is that they have a contractual obligation dating back to 1995 to follow the irrigation district's lead on fish flows. So it was, the irrigation districts have taken advantage of their senior water rights and San Francisco's paranoia to get concessions from them. And so I think they might feel obligated to, they gotta, keep their position and help defeat the Bay Delta plan, or they're in bad graces with the irrigation districts. And I think the other thing is they've invested so many years in this extreme situation and the story that it'd be pretty embarrassing to all of a sudden say, hey, you know what, things really aren't that bad. We can have reliable water supply and healthier ecosystems. So we tried really hard to work with them. Nothing worked. It's an unelected body, so they're not trying to get Sierra Club endorsement, and they don't have to prove anything to the voters. So now it's more of a campaign of shame.
Right. Let's say we get a best case scenario and you get a change in flows, or whatever mechanism that you're trying to achieve. Why is that good? What does that give us?
So, well, fish need water. There was a study done recently that said fish need water. The higher flows benefit the ecosystem in a lot of ways. They create colder water, which native fish have adapted to. And that non-native fish, many of them predators like bass, like the warm water. So we've altered the ecosystem to one that favors non-native predators. If you can inundate floodplains, that's really great habitat for the baby fish. There's more food there, and there's protection from the predators. Higher flows flush out those toxic algae blooms that we've been experiencing in the Delta. So, and then higher flows get the baby fish out faster before they're eaten, and the water's a little more murky, so they can slip by the predators a little bit faster. And salmon, we use that as a shortcut to basically say salmon-based ecosystem. Because the salmon start their life in the freshwater, they go to the ocean where there's a lot more food, and they bring all those nutrients back into the upper ecosystem, and they fuel the food web. I was just reading this study where they were doing fish counts of dead carcasses in Alaska, and so as not to count the same carcass twice, they were actually throwing them on the bank. But they threw them all on the same bank for 20 years. And then they saw the vegetation was really cruising on that bank and a lot slower on the other one. So, salmon-based ecosystem. Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Dennis.
Peter, thank you very much.